Hello, I'm Ben Nasser Wissam. I'm a helpdesk network technician at Adamtex, and today we're going to start the helpdesk course. Let's get started. So, why the helpdesk training, you might ask? Are you passionate about computers and are you looking for a way to start your career in IT? Or are you simply looking for better understanding of computers? Then this course is for you. You will understand basic IT, keep up with IT advances, and create professional opportunities for yourself. In this course, we will learn how to install Windows, for example, via a key or a table in a software called Rufus. We will understand the servers, like Windows Server 2016 and these kind of things. We'll also understand the printers as well as their uses. It's important to know this because in a company, the use will vary. Then we'll see the minimal server options such as the init software, which will allow us to install software on workstations via a reference image. And finally, we will see tools to facilitate the handling. Finally, we will study the hardware, which is quite simple, like computer components, HDD or SSD hard drives, or other components like the motherboard and the video. Hello, my name is Ben Nasser Wissam and I'm a network technician at Adamtex, and today we will see the installation of Windows with a bootable key. So how does a bootable key work? First of all, a bootable key is a key that will allow you to configure Windows on the key, to create an ISO image, and to be able to create and launch an image of Windows to be able to install it on your computer. So quite simply, we will insert a key that will install Windows when the computer starts. So today we're going to proceed with Rufus, which is a software that allows you to configure an ISO image on a USB key. To do this, we'll need a key of at least 5 GB, and this key will be formatted during the process, so be careful to not leave any documents on it. So that's how Rufus translates roughly, and we'll see you in a few minutes for the Rufus software. See you soon! So we found ourselves on the Google page for the Rufus software. So we will type Rufus simply and we will click on the first link. So this is what the official website for Rufus looks like, the software for the USB key. We'll go down, we'll click on Rufus 3.17 below download. It will launch a download of an installer. We launch it and there we'll have the incredible Rufus software. I'll get back to you in 2 short seconds for the installation. So we launched the Rufus software and I'm going to enter my USB key. As I was saying, you need a key of at least 5 GB and I personally took a 32 GB key. So there you have the device. You will select your USB key and select Disk Image or ISO. And there you can also select your Windows ISO. So you don't have to set anything else. You can just change the name of your USB key if you want. For example, I'm going to call it boot key. And then we're going to use the software and put boot. So here it warns us that the key is going to be formatted. We press OK, it starts, and I'll take you back after it's finished. So we're back after the Rufus installation. So you're going to close the installer, and now you're going to plug your USB key back in and turn your computer back on. From that point on, we'll start the Windows installation. You will press F8 in general, but it depends on the computer. You have several options, so F2, F6 or F12, and then you will launch the boot manager like this, and this boot manager will allow you to access something called USB hard drive. It will allow you to launch the installer on your USB key. When you've done that, we'll meet again for the next part. Then we meet again for the installation of Windows. We click on Install Now. It will take a little time, I think. Well, it depends on your machine, but for me it goes quickly. So if you have a Windows key, you will click here and enter it. I don't have a product key, so I'll click here. We wait and then we will choose here which Windows we want to install. So I'm going to go for Windows Professional. I click on Next and will accept the contract. As it's a new Windows installation, we will install only Windows Advanced. We will select the disk and we will put Next. And here it is. Our Windows is going to be installed. See you at the end. So here it is. It's installed. So our machine will reboot and it will run on the Windows configuration. So I am on a virtual machine because I don't really want to reinstall my Windows on my PC, which is already prepared. So it will load and we will be able to enter the information. So we're back again after the installation, where we'll have to set up and configure, and I'll teach you how to set up. So first, you'll select the region. I'm in France, so I'll select France, and we'll wait. You will then select in relation to your keyboard. I'm a French layout, so I'm going to select a French provision. We can add a second layout, but here we'll ignore it. Next, there are some important installations that will be done, as it's written on the screen, so I'll pick you up afterwards. So I'm taking you back for the rest of the installation. Next, configure for personal use or your organization. You're probably in a company, so I'm going to ask you to press configure for an organization. So we'll wait a little longer. You put in your organization's Google account. I'm not currently in the field, so I'm not going to do that. Then we'll wait again, and then you put in an email. You're going to enter your email, and I'm going to set myself up as an offline account just for the installation. So it will leave you with a limited experience as I have not activated Windows. Then you click on Next. So I'll stay on a limited experience. I'm going to put that it's Laurent who's going to use this computer. Next, we're going to create a little password for him. Here, we're going to confirm it. We're going to create a security question because we have an online account. I'll then put some answers that I'll remember. And we'll wait once again. So you can activate the experiments if you want. I personally won't do it for other users because it takes a bit of performance out of the computer, but for a company computer, it's highly recommended. You can then activate Cortana if it's instinctive for you, which is what I'm going to do here. So that's going to continue with the Windows configuration, and I'll get back to you afterwards. And that's it. We have installed Windows. Thank you. Hello, I'm a help desk technician at Adamtex. My name is Vanessa Wissam, and today we're going to see a facilitation tool. Let's get started. Today, we're going to see a software called Ninit. So basically, what is Ninit? It's a software that will create a reference image to install software and update computers from the server. So they are connected to a server together, and they will be updated and install software at the same time on all the computers from the server. For the installation, you'll need a search engine, and we'll get to that one in a moment. Let's get started. So we're going to be on a search engine. You'll type Ninit at the top, and that's going to be the first site. You have to click on it, and you're going to land on this page. So now I will explain to you why we're going to use Ninit rather than doing these installations manually. Ninit is really convenient because here, for example, you can see on the side that we can click to choose the software to install on our reference. Our reference will allow us to install everything at the same time on all the computers. So it will save you a lot of time and it will prevent errors. That is to say, you won't make as many errors as if you had installed all the software on all the computers manually. So the functioning of the site is quite simple. Here, we look at the software. So to create a reference, we'll click on the software we're interested in. So we'll click on Chrome, for example, on Zoom, on TeamViewer, if I manage to find it, on Java, we'll say Python 2. And so once we've selected all the software we'll need for Ninit, we'll go down and we'll press on Get Your Ninit. You'll get a page that will appear, you'll save, and then, as soon as the download is finished, we'll have completed the first part of this tutorial. Thanks for following! Hello, my name is Benasser Wissam. I'm a network help desk technician at Adamtex, and today we're going to do some hardware. Let's get started. So first of all, we will see the computer components. So we have the central unit case, which will allow us to store the elements and to ventilate the whole thing. And we'll start with the motherboard at the bottom right. So the motherboard is a plate in the form of a printed circuit. It permits to fix the components to itself and to power them. It contains the processor, the RAM, and the video card. We will now talk about the processor. So the processor is the brain of the computer. It's the one that will perform the calculations for the proper functioning of the computer. There are several processor powers and they are expressed in gigahertz. Then we have the RAM or random access memory, depending on what you call it. This is an important memory for the computer. Indeed, it's what will temporarily store the data of a program to lighten the processor. The more RAM you have, for example, the faster your computer will be, especially when you open several programs at the same time. That is, if I open a Windows page, I can open several pages in a row, and I can also open something in the background. So the more RAM I have, the less trouble my PC will have in being fast. Next, we have the hard drive. So the hard drive is another kind of memory. This one allows us to store data, for example photos, documents, words, and these kind of things. And unlike the RAM, it keeps data temporarily, or rather until we decide to delete them. Today, there are two types of hard disks. So we have HDDs, which are mechanical hard drives with a platter, and we have SSDs, which are hard disks that are much faster and much more recent. Then we'll deal with the graphics card. So the graphics card is often integrated into the motherboard. It allows the correct management of the display on the screen. So it can be dissociated, it can change PC, well, like all the components, but it can be put in operation with another graphics card depending on your motherboard. For example, games require a lot of graphic resources. It's a big use of power and graphic resources, so you need a big powerful graphics card to do video games, for example. Then we have the power supply. Obviously, without electricity, there is no computer and we can't use it. So here we have the power supply unit, which will power the motherboard and which will itself power the components. It's different from the graphics card, of course, because the graphics card needs a special cable to be powered from the power supply. Finally, we have a disk drive, as you can see here. The disk drive, in fact, is what will allow us to insert a disk and be recognized by the computer. So this disk drive is connected to a cable through the motherboard. So now we're going to start with the presentation of the motherboard and we will go to the number 1 level. So number 1 is a chipset, and a chipset is where we're going to put the processor. So we're going to open the chipset, we're going to put the processor on it, and then we're going to lock, as we say, the processor to the motherboard. So the processor will be placed on top and there will be a processor fan or water cooling. More recently, this is what water coolers are called. Then we'll move on to number 2. You can see that there are 2 slots for number 2. In fact, this is because it's a fairly recent graphics card, and now, in 2022, we can use 2 graphics cards together. So it's actually very practical It allows you to have more power, more output, etc. For example, for people who make video games or movies, it definitely allows you to have a better visual rendering, or for example, for those who do editing, a better video output. Next, we will move on to number 3. So number 3 is going to be the insertion. These are doors for inserting additional cards. So we're going to insert network cards, for example, to pick up Wi-Fi, or we're going to insert sound cards, for instance. If there are people among you who make music, productions, and this kind of things, it will be useful to insert a more powerful sound card, knowing that the other sound cards, or rather the sound cards integrated directly on the motherboard, are often not great. So it's better to have an external sound card. We'll now move on to number 4. So number 4 is the RAM slots. So here we have a motherboard that we'll call ATX, one of the biggest motherboard formats, because as you can see, there are 4 RAM slots. There will be other motherboards called Mini ATX because there will only be 2 RAM slots, for example. And so we're going to unclip the little ports on the sides and put the RAM bars in, so this is where they fit. To finish, we're going to see the motherboard power supply because it's very important. So we're going to go to the 2 number 7s, starting with the one on the top left. So you can see that this is an 8-port power supply, which can be extended to 10 ports. And this is simply the power supply for the processor, as I showed you on the chipset. This processor needs a higher power supply, so we're going to plug it in directly via a cable. As for the other number 7, it's the motherboard power supply. So the motherboard, as I told you earlier, it's going to power all the other components. And so it needs a power input, quite simply. And that's it. We have seen the main components of the motherboard. Thank you for following along and see you next time. Hello, I'm Vanessa Wissam. I'm a helpdesk technician at Adamtex, and today we're going to see the troubleshooting. Let's get started. You can see on the screen an NZXT motherboard, and we will start by detecting the main problems. So if the computer doesn't turn on, we'll simply check the connections because it can happen to have a silly error on the connections. Moreover, on the motherboard, we have a green pin. So on this fairly recent motherboard, there will be 2 big buttons, one green and one red. And so on this motherboard, if it lights up, everything is fine. But if the green pin does not light up, we will have a power supply problem. So we will avoid dismantling the power supply. We're not going to play the electricians, it's not our role. So we will simply test with another power supply, and if the pin still doesn't light up, we will consider that the motherboard is out of order. Now, if we turn on the computer and we hear a beep, we're going to check the RAM strips and see if they're properly plugged into the slots. So we'll also check the chipset and the processor to see if it's properly plugged into the motherboard. And these are going to be fairly recurrent problems because motherboards can go in both ways, but there's a bad connection configuration, if I may say so, and this is a fairly recurrent problem with motherboards. So we will hear this beeping sound which will indicate that there's a problem with the motherboards. I will now explain how to connect RAM strips. The RAM strip will only plug in one way. There is a short side and a long side, so you have to look at the slots on the motherboard. So we're going to open the little white clips, as you can see on the screen, and we're going to slide the strip in and press it in the direction of the motherboard. You will then hear a small clip, which will indicate that the RAM strip is correctly inserted in the slots. It's very simple. Now we're going to look at another problem, and it's if there's nothing displayed on the screen. So we're going to check the connections on the screen side and the graphics card side again. This time, if the problem persists, it will be a problem with the graphics card and this is also fairly recurrent. So what you're going to do is simply change the graphics card to test. So you already know that the graphics card you're going to change works, and we will be able to confirm that if you have something displayed at that time, it was really a graphics card malfunction and that it was out of order. If not, we'll have a problem maybe with the power supply. In fact, recent graphics card needs to be powered directly by a power cable, and therefore we can also consider that the power supply case is out of order. So now if you have a problem starting up the computer, so for example the computer starts up and you get an error message or something, you're going to check if your SATA cables are connected properly and if your hard drive is powered properly. And then if it still doesn't work, you'll start the computer with the F8 or F6 option and it will open this tool that you see on the right and you'll ask to troubleshoot Windows. Sometimes the hard disk will have trouble booting, so we'll need to manually take care of it with the Windows Boot Manager. Also, sometimes we'll have a problem with the version of Windows, and so I'm going to invite you to watch the Install Windows video, which will allow you to reinstall Windows directly on a new hard disk. Finally, we're going to finish with another fairly recurrent problem. Sometimes you'll turn on the computer and it will turn on normally, but then suddenly everything will shut down. So as I said, this is a fairly recurrent problem, and it's more precisely a processor problem. It means that the processor is overheating so much that the computer has to shut down for safety. Usually, this is either because the chipset is very dusty, or it can be because you need to change the thermal paste. As you can see on the screen, these are usually quite old thermal pastes, and therefore you have to change it. So how do you change the thermal paste? All you need is some alcohol or solvent to wipe off the old thermal paste. You just have to apply the equivalent of a grain of rice on the processor to put the Venturad back on. And that's it. Thanks for watching this video and see you next time. Hello, I'm Vanessa Wissam. I'm a network helpdesk technician at Adamtex, and today we're going to talk about printers. Let's get started. So, in the past, printers have gone through two fairly widespread connectivity systems. First, there was the LPT port, as you can see on the screen. This was a very useful port at the time because we didn't really have a solution for connectivity. Today, it's obsolete because it has been replaced by the USB port. The latter is really a universal solution, and it's a solution that will be found on absolutely all printers. Over time, we started to use RJ45 cables, or Wi-Fi, to transmit printing via the network. These were solutions that allowed us to get rid of the cables. For Wi-Fi, for example, it was really interesting to be able to get rid of the cables and to be able to put the printer in almost any place without having cable problems, etc. So it was a bit slower, but it was really innovative. And then we started to use RJ45 cables, which made the transmission of files for the printer more fluid. So it made it possible to print faster. Regarding the ink, we went through several solutions. There was, for example, as you can see, liquid ink. This is a solution that is still used today and it allows for fast printing. So liquid ink will dry very quickly, and at the time, for example, it allowed savings to be made because it was a cheap solution. Today, the problem is that we have the laser solution, which is going to supplant the liquid solution because in the long term, the result is going to be more interesting economically speaking and also on the paper. So it will last longer. Printers have different aspects depending on their use. That is to say, for small offices, we will have a really small printer which will permit slow printing, but which will be effective for a small number of people. Then, depending on the use, as I said, for a large office, we'll prefer several printers or even several large printers. The problem with these printers is that, economically speaking, in the short term, it's not interesting because we have printers that are going to be widespread and that are quite large. They will therefore be very inexpensive in the long term. In the short term, contrarily, it will be expensive, but in the long term, it will allow us, economically speaking, to have the best solution and to have, for an office, fast and controlled printing. And that's it. Thank you for watching this video. Hello, I'm Benasser Wissam. I'm a network helpdesk technician at Alamtex, and today we're going to see the printing video part 2. Let's get started. So in this video, we're going to look at the most important terms when we talk about printers and when we want to choose a new printer after having seen the best economic choice for each user. First of all, we have criteria, and the first one is the size of the paper, which is going to be important depending on the type of use for the printer. So we have the type of paper, like thick paper, something for example like Canson paper. I mean, we're not going to print with Canson paper, but that's just to give you an idea of the thickness. The type of paper is also very important because if you want to print certificates, for example, it's essential not to have a regular paper. Then there's also the speed of printing, which is going to be important depending on your use. If you need to print a contract very quickly, for example, let's say you're a big company and you need to print contracts for your suppliers, it's going to be very important to print quite quickly. Scanning speed is also very important if you need to scan and to digitize documents quickly. So the duty cycle, literally translated into lifetime, is a very important notion because we're going to compare, for example, a large printer and a small one. The duty cycle will apply to these printers. So for the small printer, to give you an example, we'll say that it can print 500 times a month, and for the large printer, we'll say that it can print 100 times a month. So if we exceed the printing threshold, we will reduce the life of the printer. The notion of duty cycle is thus a basic but important notion in printing. Another rather important point is the print quality. The print quality is similar to the resolution quality for photos, so the more dpi, or dots per inch, the better. When I say dots per inch, I'll explain. So on 5 centimeters, for example, we'll say that we have 5 dots, and the more dots we have, the better quality of the print. So we will therefore have a better quality print. The printer's memory is also an important criterion because it will allow you to know to what extent you can automate a printer and queue up tasks. That is to say, if I want to print a photo, for example, and I want to put a lot of printouts behind it, for example, I need to print my CV, a cover letter, etc. Well, very important things, for instance. Can I automate these tasks and tell the printer I need to do this, then that, then this, etc.? And this is a criterion called the printer's memory. Another important criterion is the ability to print on both sides. This may sound basic, but it's a rather complicated criterion because only recent printers have this feature. So, the last and most important notion we're going to deal with is the notion of profitability. There are 3 main factors: the base price of the printer, the price of the ink, and how many pages you can print. So I've made a little explanatory table, but the terms and values are absolutely not real. It's just to explain. So we have printer A and printer B, with A supposed to represent the cheap printer, a bit cheap and low cost, and printer B, which represents a good printer, a bit expensive, we'll say. And so we'll see that for the basic prices, we'll be at 200 euros on printer A and 400 euros on printer B, but for the price of ink, we'll end up paying 70 euros on 3,000 papers for printer A, whereas for printer B, we'll be at 100 euros on 5,000 papers. Regarding the price of the paper too, for printer A, it's certainly cheaper, but the paper will be less profitable in the long term. So we come to the conclusion that over a year, we have 2,400 euros for printer A and 2,200 euros for printer B. So we have an example of a fake expensive. In other words, we have the printer that is supposed to be the most expensive, which will be more profitable for us in the long term, and even over 3 years, as you can see with the values on the slide. And that's it. Thank you for watching the video.